This is an SM Media production.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Chronicle, the Rangers Journey. I'm Scott McPike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are picking this show up on the 11th episode in 2007. What happened when the Paul Le Guen experiment ended in disaster and David Murray looked to an old friend to help him out, and Walter Smith returned for his second spell at the club. To join me on this chapter of the Rangers Journey, Gavin Kelly. Gavin, it's a pleasure to welcome you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. How are you today?
I'm absolutely brilliant. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We are obviously, this is a fascinating period in Rangers history, as every chapter of this whole journey is, but this one's interesting because the Paul Le Guen experiment did not work. We spoke about it last week. It was doomed to fail, obviously, from the beginning. Those first few days of 2007, what do you remember about those first few days when it was clear that Le Guen was going and a replacement was needed?
Yeah, it was more the sort of the uncertainty of where to go next, because when Le Guen arrived, it was hugely exciting. He was one of the most sought after managers on the continent. He'd been very successful, and then it was the disappointment straight away from that summer of the players that came in didn't match the manager that came in, and it became pretty apparent early doors that he wasn't wanting to stick around that long, because there's obviously been promises made that weren't kept, and then things started to unravel from there. So we still had the core of a good squad in terms of the players that were there. There were some of them were kind of on their way out, but we knew that it probably wouldn't take that much. But what we did need was stability. So when some of the names were mentioned, and obviously with the job that Walter Smith was doing at Scotland, it seemed like the very, very obvious choice in terms of who was going to come in and steady the ship, regardless of how long it might be for.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Yeah, on the 4th of January, Le Guen leaves, and straight away David Murray kind of realises the situation isn't working out, and he gets to work. He approaches Walter Smith to try and entice him to leave Scotland. Now, what we need to remember as well as at this time, and I'm sure you'll agree, Walter Smith was doing a tremendous job at Scotland. He had completely turned them around after the Bertie Votes fiasco. Walter Smith leaving Scotland at the time, like that was a tough call for him to make. Now, I know it's obviously because that Walter had obviously taken Scotland to a new level, but at that time, was it fair to say maybe unfinished? It was kind of halfway through that job. Like obviously McLeish takes it on, but leaving Scotland at that time was massive for Walter.
Yeah, I still think that's one of the things where sort of opposition fans, this sort of hatred, whether hatred's the right word or not, for Rangers, because we took Smith back at a time when Scotland were on the way up. They'd been gradually progressing for the whole time that he'd been there. He'd developed a real sort of club mentality at Scotland. You kind of knew the players that got involved in every squad, and he'd got them performing really well. And it was some of the results that the campaign where we had Italy, Ukraine and France in the same group, and were sort of goal or dodgy refereeing decision away from getting through was incredible. And it looked as though that was the corner turned, and that the fact that it's taken so long to actually get to a major tournament after then is incredible, because it looked like things were going to happen. But as Walter Smith said at the time, says it's the only club that he would have left Scotland for. At the time, I don't think he had any great intentions of going back into club management. He'd sort of been there, done it, experienced the Premier League, done everything with Rangers, and I don't think he was specifically looking for it until obviously the phone call was made and asked for him to come back. So, yeah, especially with Alan McCoist as an assistant at Scotland, it seemed like a very, very easy decision for them to make.
And Murray, to be fair to him, we'll lay into him again in this show, and we've laid into him and a few others for certain decisions. But again, he's quick to get Walter in. He knows Walter's desperate to come back, and once the kind of lure becomes too much, it's all done pretty quickly. It's all done in a few days. He's announced as the manager on the 10th of January. McCoist is an interesting one. McCoist coming as assistant manager because obviously McCoist at the time, he'd been with Scotland as a coach, but it wasn't his permanent job. He was very popular on the television, had to give up his Question of Sport career. It was a big thing for McCoist to leave that, but obviously the lure of coming back to Ibrox for McCoist was too much as well.
Yeah, I think from that as well, I remember at the time, the thing with McCoist was he'd obviously done his coaching badges as well, and you don't do that sort of thing if you've got no interest in sort of getting back into the game and doing the sort of coaching side of things, because he'd been a media personality when he was still playing as well. So
yeah,
it's almost like it was almost like a hobby for him doing the media side of things, because everything that came out from sort of the SFA and his coaching when he's done his badges, that he was one of the highest scoring coaches in terms of how he was performing. So he obviously had sort of skill for it in terms of being a coach. I know obviously it comes out later on when he was the manager that some of the training sessions were a bit primitive and basic in terms of what we were doing. However, his personality in terms of managing people and interacting with people was obviously effective, and as a pairing, it certainly seemed to work.
There's a fantastic story with McCoist and Murray negotiating his contract. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but McCoist was desperate to get his TV money. He was on decent money with BBC at the time, and McCoist took that into Murray and said, I want to get paid this, and Murray come back with a bit of a lesser offer and said, you're getting that. Because Murray knew, Murray's a good businessman. Murray knew McCoist was desperate to come back, and it just shows though that there was a lot more, like two really kind of Rangers men that was needed. The fan opinion at the time was not on the same hymn sheet. I remember at the time there was thoughts of this is a step back to the 90s. This isn't the modernisation we spoke about in the summer. What was your opinion of it? Do you remember the kind of opinions at the time?
Yeah, I think it's because the way, like 9 in a row and then the failed attempt for 10 in a row and what happened, and even with hindsight, we seemed to have the right players, and we're unlucky with like Sam Russo getting injured and what happened with Negri halfway through the season. So things could have gone a different way, but it was more that we had the players there, but we didn't seem to have them set up right. It didn't seem to be a style of play as such, and it was more. It was the players that were getting things done, or it was taking individual brilliance from sort of Gaza or Laudrup, and when that they kind of, for their different reasons in that last season, stopped performing at their usual standards, things started to fall apart a bit. But then Smith obviously went away, went to Everton, had to deal with a lot of hardships there, and then he's gone to Scotland, albeit for a short time, and he became a more, not pragmatic, but a more rounded coach in terms of
far more tactically.
He had to learn tactically. He couldn't get away with just having better players and having somebody that would score 40 goals a season at the top of the tree sort of thing. So it definitely came back as a different player. But like you said, we went from the excitement of Le Guen to then, well, we know what Water's like, and we've not got the money that we had before, and the sort of accusations that he was only successful previously because he had the bigger budget and could spend money that we no longer had when he came back.
Yeah, I remember that at the time. It was weird that you understand it because there was this thing of Rangers and the way it ended, as you say, the 9 in a row spell it turned into a bit of a fiasco in the dressing room, and not that was all Smith's fault. I think if Smith would have had his time again, he would have probably done certain things better, but again, it was out of control. I don't think Walter could have done it all himself, but there was this thing as well about Europe. Walter in Europe he wasn't as good as what he would go on to be later on, and that's what we're talking about, this tactical difference. Walter had completely transformed himself as a coach. He'd learned a lot as well. We learned a lot in Scotland, going to places like France and going to against Italy, that you had to set up a different way. You couldn't be as open because you would just get punished. So it wasn't the same. It was a different Walter Smith. It was a more rounded Walter Smith, as you say. and he had to come in and completely transform the fortunes of the club. And you touched on another interesting point as well. It wasn't like the squad was broken. There was a really good core there. You had a few good players. There was an area that did need sharpened up. Is that fair to say? The defence was a big issue in the Le Guen spell, and he goes in and starts it straight away. Andy Webster on loan from Wigan, again on paper looked a terrific signing, really good at Hearts. Had obviously had a really good time there. Davy Weir from Everton, a veteran centre back. I don't think we expected what Davy Weir were going to do. And Ugo Ekiog as well, another experienced Premier League defender. This was a massive statement that the defence was needing sorted, and he went in and done it straight away.
Yeah, that's it, because it's the players that we brought in, even that were already there as well from McLeish's time. He'd kind of looked to the French market, and it almost looked as if that was a sort of long-term plan in terms of maybe Murray had already had ideas of getting Le Guen because he was on his gap year. So the season before we were going to get Le Guen, we've brought in also I'd like to Rodriguez, fan,
yeah,
Danny as well. But again, we were playing them in. I mean, Danny was playing at centre half sometimes under Le Guen, and you think
a centre
not even a fielder, let alone playing him as a centre half.
And Danny and Papach as a centre back pairing, that was not.
I know. So it was almost similar in that. I mean, McGregor was there, had Hutton coming through and emerging. I mean, Stevie Smith as well, who was actually, if anything, was higher thought of than Hutton at the time before he had his injury problems. So between likes of them, Charlie Adam, Boyd, Barry Ferguson was still there. There was that core, that one issue of the centre defence, which Smith obviously saw it straight away and actually approached it almost instantly in terms of who he brought in. He knew what he was getting. Weir wasn't getting games at Everton. Boyhood fan, so he jumped at the chance, and there was no way any of us thought he was going to be there any longer than the 6 months that he signed for. But an incredible Rangers career. When you look at what he won in the time he was at Rangers, the number of games he played, UEFA Cup final thrown in as well. It's just an incredible sort of career for any sort of Rangers player. Just the level of consistency and like the partners that he had. He seemed to improve them as well between Wilson, Bugera, Queller as well. Just had some great partnerships. But yeah, that was the biggest issue, and Smith sorted it straight away. Even little things like moving Papach to left back, and straight away you've got your defence sorted. And again, it was almost not quite overnight, but it wasn't far away.
No, it wasn't. And it just steadies the ship. Bringing in Kevin Thompson as well from Hibs, a hot young talent in that remarkable Hibs team. He was replacing Clement, who returned to France to reunite with Le Guen. I think that would have been one I would be interested to see, because Clement was a really good shining light of that time. I wonder what would have happened if Smith had managed to keep hold of him. Now, the argument is, would Thompson have signed if Clement was there? I don't know. But that would have been interesting, especially what goes on later on. Like, Clement was a good talent.
Yeah, he was a good player. He was the one that, even when things weren't going well, you could see he had something about him. And it's a shame that he didn't really get to play in a more sort of settled Rangers team with a balanced defence and coming in as sort of a signing to improve the midfield rather than one of many players that came in and most of them were subpar, and he's kind of been grouped with the rest of them all together. But he obviously wanted to go back to France, either hadn't settled or whatever, because it certainly wasn't through talent that he was getting thrown, because he was a different player to Thompson. But it's maybe the sort of thing that Smith had decided how he was going to play and the style he was going to set up in, and that Clement maybe wasn't the right type for that system, and it allowed us to bring in a little bit of money to obviously go and get the replacement.
Yeah, absolutely as well. It's just something that kind of caught my eye there when you see like Clement. I've thought about that for years. Would Clement have maybe been a big player on that team the season after? But Smith comes in, steady to ship completely, and form picks up. 7 of the next 8 league games would result in victories. The game I think that kind of turns this round that Rangers are kind of back, I would say, is obviously the 1-0 victory at Parkhead. Ekiog with an overhead kick. The defence was so solid. It would only conceded 2 goals in that period as well. But that going to Parkhead and winning, now the league was over. The league was absolutely beyond Rangers as a contest. But that game just showed that Rangers were back. Rangers, they had this. It was like a classic Smith performance of going there and just wasn't a great performance, but it was just so solid, and that was a big turning point, I think, for Rangers.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost, there's sort of shades of sort of similarity when Gerrard came in as well, and it was like the first Old Firm win, then the first Old Firm win at Parkhead, and these little markers that, even on the grand scheme of things, Le Guen wasn't there for very long. Things went that badly that quickly that it seemed to fall miles behind them in such a short period of time, and we had likes of the players that were brought in that summer, it just didn't seem to be anywhere near good enough for Rangers, and there's still a few sort of French players as well that needed to be offloaded, and it just looks like we're miles away. So getting that victory when you know that it's the league's done, it just sets a mark and a wee reminder that next season's going to be a different story.
The UEFA Cup run ended with a defeat to Osasuna in aggregate. They went on to reach the final that season before losing to Seville. Smith they secured second place. It was a comfortable end to the season. Another win over Celtic at Ibrox. They'd cut the deficit from 17 points to 12 points. There was a lot of thoughts that this summer could be massive in terms of reclaiming the league from Celtic. Once Smith gets in and gets a proper pre-season, this will be massive for Rangers, and Rangers could go on to have a good season next year. But little did we know just how memorable it would be.
I know, and that's, you already had the sort of the foundations in terms of things probably wouldn't have gone as well as he'd expected them to go at the end of that season, in terms of making those minor adjustments to the defence, getting likes of Kevin Thompson in midfield, because then it became, most Rangers fans now could almost reel off that team, because there was that many players that would play. Probably about a quarter of 8 players that would play every week, most weeks. Certainly the goalkeeper and the defence, the odd sort of rotation. Same with the midfield. You kind of knew who was going to be playing most weeks, and it just brought in that stability and the right players for the right manager for the right sort of system. And it's when you get all those things together, you know that you're going to be onto something good, and you just seem to get it absolutely bang on.
He did, and that was a big thing. There was a lot of positives going into the season of 2007-2008, but over the summer there was a lot of off-field stuff going on as well. David Murray, a man who had a very large ego, he was about to get it stroked even further. He was made a Knight of the Realm by the Queen in the summer of 2007. He went by Sir David Murray for services to business. Let's pause there and just think about that. Just 15 years later, that David Murray was given a knighthood for services to business. But at the time, this was seen as a big thing. It was, wasn't it? It was like, oh, Rangers owners getting made a knight. Like, this is massive. It was, wasn't it? It was massive at the time.
It's the same with the players. Whenever you get, like, when McCoy's got his MBE, and obviously Jermaine Defoe, and whenever you have a Rangers player or anybody in the coaching staff gets this sort of accolade, and it is a big thing. And obviously getting a knighthood's the sort of the highest sort of accolade that these individuals can get in Britain, really. So it's, and you could see at the time, but again, it was as you've said before about David Murray, and it was never really putting his hand into his pocket to sort of fund Rangers. It was always, he was a good businessman in terms of he knew how to persuade other people to part with their money and bring them in, rather than putting his hand into his own pocket. And obviously the last 10 years for him have been a lot harder than the sort of 80s and 90s were.
Yeah, and you kind of look behind the surface of this, and David Murray's getting his knighthood from the Queen. He's down at Buckingham Palace, but behind the scenes, he's £678 million he owes to the Bank of Scotland. Like, the hold the bank would have on him would get tighter over the next year when the whole financial system in the world just completely crashed, and Murray became, the thing of getting a loan just for anything was, that their days were over. And I think Murray and Rangers both learned that was how much they were relying on the bank. But when you look at that, he's getting made a Knight of the Realm while owing the bank nearly £700 million. That shows the way the world was at the time, especially in the financial sector.
Well, that's it. It's kind of the same as it is now, and they still think it's a lot of the financial crash, and certainly things with the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
The mortgage market was always that people being able to self-certify, they're getting 5 times, 6 times their wages, and it was this higher end of the market, not your like an average couple trying to buy an average semi-detached house with a 5-10% deposit. It wasn't
Correct.
that end of the market that caused the crash, and it was the banks sort of backing up people like Murray that probably had the biggest
They
influence.
thought they could walk in water. It was that.
That's it. And I think the club suffered as an effect of Murray's personal business interests in terms of they knew that Rangers' debt was serviceable, but when the owner, so chairman, was having issues of his own, they knew that if things did go wrong with the club, he wasn't in a position to be able to put his hand in his own pocket. So I think it definitely had an effect on us as a club, as a side effect.
Yeah, and at the AGM, that somebody brings up something as well. He's asked about if he'd ever thought about selling the club, and this was the first time I think I've looked back and I've done all the research. It's the first time he floats that idea of that he might sell to the right person, someone with the best interests of Rangers at heart. Now, would those words come back to haunt him later on when he does decide to sell up? But in retrospect, at 2007, the Rangers' debt is not unsustainable at this point. I think it's down to something like 33 million. It's not, as you say, a disaster. Was this the right time? Was this the time that he could have got out and saved his legacy, do you think? Or was it still too far gone? And again, the EBTs are still in the background. They don't really come to the surface till a couple of years later. But this was the time. Was this the time he could have maybe saved face?
I think so, yeah. I mean, he kind of, when Smith comes back, we obviously do spend a decent bit of money. We kind of front load the spending. Again, it was almost quite similar to when Gerrard arrived, in that we front load the spending to sort of rebuild the squad. So the likes of Thompson and Whittaker and McCulloch, they all come in. Kusan as well, and we do spend a bit of money initially, and then it gets the purse strings get tightened. So it probably would have been a good time, well, obviously Carlos Queller as well, so it would have been a good time to sell then, once we've brought in a whole load of new players and we're on the upward curve in terms of performance on the pitch, and certainly last season he probably could have left certainly a bit more favourably than he ended up doing, because it was at that stage where it's not that he didn't care, because obviously everything with David Murray was usually linked to his ego, so it was taking a massive dent with what had happened with Le Guen. Whether he thought that would have been a great moment to leave, bringing Le Guen in and seeing him push us on, but it obviously never happened, and it just got to a stage where Murray had been here too long, and it was like he was not getting bored, but he no longer had the same enthusiasm that he used to have.
Yeah, I think his ego takes a massive dent with Le Guen, because, as we spoke about in this podcast over the past few weeks, it's not Rangers getting it wrong, it's David Murray getting it wrong. And that's the problem. The Le Guen thing is totally on him. Now, we got away with it at the time because Smith came in and completely steadied it, but you look back at that time and Murray, I think that's the last time you see he's obviously talking about the moonbeams thing and things like that. Like, after that, it's not long term, it's not an ambitious project, I'm looking to get out. And I think the only thing stopping him getting out is, I think if anybody he'd said that he'd turned down a couple of bids that has since been proven not to be true, but is anybody looking at that as a good business prospect at the time with all this debt and what's going on with he's planted a time bomb with the EBTs, he absolutely has, but could that have been avoided? Could somebody have went in with serious money, or would they have been put off with what was potentially under the bonnet?
I don't think, because of how EBTs were actually worked at the time, we'd be looking back at and judging it with hindsight, which is easier, because at the time obviously it wasn't an issue. But the debt itself, I think it was more the financial climate at the time. Things were starting to brew in terms, like I said, in terms of the banking infrastructure and finance in general. We're sort of people within the industry would have known that there was a crash coming in 2008. There's people were starting to predict that there was going to be issues, and buying a football club is never usually the right way to make money. So anybody that had money would probably be looking after themselves first and foremost and protecting themselves for the future. So in the grand scheme of things, Murray wouldn't have been wanting to make money on the sale of Rangers. So even if you came in and cleared the debt, you'd still be getting a bargain in terms of the training facility was there, Ibrox was there, the playing squad. Certainly when after Walter arrived, the value of the playing squad, when you look at your young players, like I said, with McGregor, Ferguson, Hutton, you had guys there that were worth decent money. So it was 30 million to clear the debt would have got your Rangers quite comfortably, and it would have been money well spent at the time. But it was more a case of the individuals actually having the money in the first place and not wanting to throw themselves into something that could be quite high risk.
Yeah, but as you say, like he did find the money to back him. I don't know where from, but he did get it. He did. Smith got the money. I think Smith would have took that job, but I don't think Smith's taking it without getting a bit of assurances that he would get a budget to spend money. So he does £10 million in the summer. He spends in the likes of Carlos Cuellar, Daniel Kuzan, Lee McCulloch, Stephen Naismith, some of the headline signings, and the target was simple: get into the Champions League and regain the SPL title from Celtic. And it's a really good start. Rangers win their first 5 league games, they score 18 goals, and they get Champions League qualification, beating the likes of Zeta and Red Star Belgrade. That Red Star Belgrade game, Novo scores in the last minute to secure a victory. The season started brilliantly. 5 big wins, and then obviously that coveted Champions League qualification.
Yeah, that's what you're wanting. Whenever it's well, it's not a new manager, but it's certainly the start of the next season. That's kind of what you're looking for, and we're scoring plenty of goals. The new players that came in, they knew what the game plan was. It was a relatively simple game plan, but we had the first kind of signs that we had the 2 different game plans in terms of sort of Boyd's impact when he was going to play, and then like Kusan and Dashville, and when they were going to play. And it seemed it was totally different to before when Smith was there, and it was just trying to use the same players to implement the same game plan we were doing in Scottish football, which was never going to work against better opposition, and being more pragmatic got us into the Champions League. Whereas if you tried to play the same way that we had before, it wouldn't have happened. So it did. It was definitely a refreshing change, and it was from what was a hard draw against Red Star Belgrade at the time. But I mean, that was our first 4 games, or the 4 games of the qualifying rounds, and kept 4 clean sheets.
Yeah.
So that's straight away. That's Walter Smith second time around in a nutshell there.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's as you say, it's so much difference in Europe compared to the first spell. As you say, 4 clean sheets and 4 qualifiers, and Rangers are into the Champions League. But league form would take a dip after that. There were 3 defeats to Hearts, Hibs and Dundee United in 6 games. But in amongst those results was a 3-0 win over Celtic at Ibrox. Nacho Novo scoring a double. Sitting in November, Rangers were 3 points behind Celtic. And apart from those 3 defeats were obviously big, but it was still, you could see this was going to be close between the 2 teams. But a 3-0, but Rangers were outstanding that day, I thought, against Celtic, the 3-0 win.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where we know how Old Firm games can then affect one way or another the rest of the season. And ironically, it's that we lose the next game, but on most occasions, certainly, well, going back to recent comparison, Gerrard, when he's won the 2 Old Firm games, sort of at the Christmas period before the break, it was almost like right, yes, that's us made it, and then we've had a drop off. Whereas after this game, we'll lose the next one, but then go on a really good run. So it's like an indication of, right, this is what we're capable of doing. Let's sort of find that level of consistency that we need. But whenever you're winning any Old Firm game 3-0, then it's, you know, you're going home happy, and it's going to set you up well.
Absolutely, yeah. And the Champions League draw, Rangers are drawn against Barcelona. Obviously, we know Barcelona. This is the early stages of this, is pre-Pep, but still an amazing team under Frank Rijkaard. French champions Lyon and German champions Stuttgart. Gavin, it wasn't an easy draw. Even then, it was how are Rangers getting out of this?
I know it's as tough as you can get, even though it's maybe not sort of on paper. Like nowadays, it would be having Bayern Munich, PSG, and Real Madrid in the same group. So it's the sort of group that you wouldn't be able to get nowadays, almost, because of the way the seasons work to try and avoid this sort of thing. But at that point, you kind of go, right, well, let's just enjoy it whilst we're here and see what happens. Try and get a few decent results and not get humped along the way, sort of thing. So. And then the way that it was started was absolute fantasy stuff, and the Lyon game still one of our even with the things that Gio's done recently and Gerrard, it's still one of our best ever performances at that level, given the team we were playing against.
Yeah, I mean the start, Rangers win 2-1 at home to Stuttgart in the first game, and then go to Lyon. It's still this. It's a game you look back on and you just never forget. It was such a dominant display, 3-0 away. McCulloch, Kuzan and Beasley with the goals. Every goal was just amazing. It was just a brilliant display. And I mean, imagine that, like, people just 6 months before were saying Walter Smith, it was a bad appointment, he couldn't do it in Europe, and you go to the French champions and beat them 3-0.
Yeah, I think with that one, just when you mentioned the goal scorers there, I think later on in that season, not having Beasley available affected it, because I think if he'd been able to keep himself fit every week, would have had more of an impact in the way that we played, in terms of the balance of having sort of Thompson, Ferguson, Davis on the right hand side, as he was playing quite a lot then, and having somebody who's more of that natural winger, more of an attacking sort of outlet. I know sometimes we played McCulloch on the left as well, but I think would have quite liked to have him more. Certainly when we were going with sort of the 4-5-1, having that, would have liked to have had Beasley's pace as an outlet on the wing, and to be able to provide more support for the striker. But no, it was just an outstanding performance. McCulloch always seemed to, the European games always seemed to sort of suit him as well, in terms of the role that he was given, and it must be a nightmare for fullbacks when you're playing against a boy that's 6'2", playing on the wing and just getting long diagonals hit up to him to win the headers and to hold it up. But you all seem to do well in those games. Sometimes I wasn't sure about McCulloch domestically, but certainly in the European games, it seemed to suit him and how we played, and it was just a very typical of Smith's second spell, how he used McCulloch in these games.
Yeah, as you say, 6 points from 2 games. In the next game, Rangers host Barcelona at Ibrox, and that's a massive result. 0-0 at home to Barcelona. I remember leaving that day going, how we got a draw out of that? And it shows you. I mean, you look at some of the players in display. Messi, Ronaldinho, Iniesta was phenomenal that night. And Rangers are sitting joint top of the group with Barcelona, and after 3 games with 7 points, and you just think the first half of that group's went about as good as it could.
Yeah, you've got absolutely no right to keep a clean sheet against that Barcelona team. And the way that we did it as well, it was, I can't remember what the possession stats were, but I can't imagine us being that far into double figures, because it was 90 minutes of just, you were just waiting for the inevitable to happen, really. But again, we've mentioned the first 2 games and things in the qualifying rounds and how they were typical of Smith's second time in charge. And if ever a result summed up what we went on to achieve in Europe under Walter Smith when he was in, it was a 0-0 draw at home against Barcelona with Messi and Ronaldinho in the side.
Yeah, I mean, still to this day, I watched back some of the highlights in Barcelona. They were just a different animal, and this was a Barcelona team pre-Pep. This Barcelona team went on to improve from this, but yeah, unbelievable side. They then beat us 2-0 at the Nou Camp. That was expected. I think Rangers done well to keep it to 2-0, to be fair, but Rangers still had a great chance to qualify. That game in Stuttgart, I think, is a fascinating game, because Rangers didn't play badly, but it was just one of those weird games. Ferguson gets injured, somebody gets sent off, if I remember rightly. It was just a disappointing 3-2 defeat.
Yeah, I think with that one, it was the way it happened. Again, you're not really. even though we beat them at Ibrox, you're not really expecting to go to the German champions, even though they maybe weren't as strong that year. But because we'd gone in front, and then we pegged them back to 2 each, and to get so close, getting to the sort of last 5 minutes before sort of going behind again, it was that sort of, we just need a point here, and it would have made all the difference. And obviously it would have taken 2 points off of Stuttgart as well, so it would have sort of ruined their chances. So
yeah,
it was that 5 minutes away from getting the result that we needed, and just couldn't get it over the line.
But it meant it was poised for the last game. Rangers would play Lyon at home. A draw would see Rangers through to the last 16, but a young Karim Benzema, who just tore Rangers apart really in that second half. 3-0 Lyon win, and Rangers fall into third place in that UEFA Cup, and they go into that for the after Christmas. It was disappointing to be eliminated from the Champions League after such a strong start, but Benzema was unplayable that night, and that was a young raw Karim Benzema. Yeah,
it was actually almost a throwback to Smith's first time in charge, with sort of playing Juventus and Ajax and getting a hiding, because it was a proper old fashioned. One team was just stronger, had better players, they moved the ball quicker, and we never really threatened to sort of cause them any real problems, other than, I think, did Darshall not have a chance early? Darshall had a chance, to make it one each or something like that, and then he got sent off. It was almost out of frustration, and even though they got a couple of late goals, it was one going on sort of 3-4 before Benzema sort of topped it off at the end of the game. But no, they were a good side, and obviously, Benzema's done all right for himself since then.
He's done no bad, and obviously earns his move to Real Madrid after that. But yeah, I mean, still UEFA Cup, or still European football, and it would go on to be an unbelievable run. But back to league action, Rangers between November and January went on a great run. They only drew one game in 7 leading into 2008. But January 2008 would see the departure of Alan Hutton. He would join Tottenham for their then record fee of £9 million. Hutton, I've said it many times on these types of shows, Hutton, from that Smith, kind of early Smith return to then, I would even say before Le Guen, under Le Guen as well, he is so good. He's just unbelievable. £9 million was a bargain Tottenham got for him, because his progression under Smith, he was one of the best fullbacks in Britain for me at that point, and he was doing it for both Rangers and Scotland. His performance against Italy in that infamous game that you spoke about, where the dodgy official, Hutton was on top of his game at that point.
Yeah, I remember reading an interview with Alan Hutton, and he actually spoke about how he spoke to the scout that had been watching him when he went down to Spurs, and he said that it was nothing to do with what you're doing week in and week in for Scotland, in Scotland. It was your performances for Rangers in the Champions League and in Europe, and your performances for Scotland. He says that's all we were looking at, because we weren't worried how you were going to play against a team that puts 10 men behind the ball or something like that, because it just doesn't happen for Spurs when the teams that they're playing against most weeks in the Premier League. There's not many teams at that time were sort of parking the bus, and so we were looking at what you did for Scotland and what you did for the Rangers in the Champions League against top level opponents, and that's what got his move. And it's an interesting one that even this summer we've seen sort of articles on scouts, and the same thing that they're speaking about with like some Morales and Kent, and Joe Arabo. It's those performances that catch the eye, and Hutton for that sort of 12-month period was, as you said, he was one of the best fullbacks in the country, and was outstanding. I mean, he did it again. He maintained that. I mean, he was unlucky at Spurs in terms that he was holding down a place, and then he got injured, and then somebody else came in and did well. So it's at that level, the depth of squads that they've got. If you lose your place and somebody does well, you face a fight to get back in. But he played plenty of games in the Premier League and more than justified his transfer fee anyway. Yeah,
I mean, as you say, he was unplayable at certain points of that. And he was doing it. It wasn't just doing it in the league, he was doing it against Barcelona. I mean, I think there was an article where I think Zambrotta was up against him. Zambrotta said he was unbelievable against him that night. And you look at the likes of Hutton, obviously $9 million. It's massive money back then, but Hutton, wasn't desperate to leave, but Rangers were desperate to cash in, and Murray pulls him into the office, and this is true. Murray pulls him into the office and says, "You have to go. We have to get this money in," and it shows you at the time Hutton's desperate to stay, but Murray's just wanting that money in the bank.
I think, as we spoke about before, the money that was spent, so about 10 million was spent. This is getting the money back.
Mm-hmm.
So whether we already knew, and there's a lot of things that we don't see in the press and papers, and in terms of signings and transfers, and there was probably already an awareness that clubs had been looking at Hutton.
Mm-hmm.
So he was maybe investing the money, or the money was getting spent, knowing that there was every chance we were going to be getting that back again. And we also had Whittaker already in the squad. I don't know, had we signed Broadfoot by this point as well?
Broadfoot
so
was there in the summer, yeah.
We knew that there was cover there with
Mm-hmm.
a couple of players that could play at right back, so we knew there was cover there. He was one of the most saleable assets, and that was it. It was Hutton wouldn't have been given much of a choice there, so we accepted the bid and you're away, sort of thing. And
that's how it
you're
happens.
not really. I know most clubs are a step down from Rangers, but going to the likes of Spurs into the Premier League, it's a great opportunity for any player, regardless of sort of how old they are.
Absolutely, yeah. And he was, despite the sale of Hutton, Rangers started 2008 really well. They won all 4 league games in January and booked a place in the League Cup final. Bringing the likes of Stephen Davison, loan from Fulham, Neil Alexander came in, and Christian Daly, who would all play a part in the second half of the season. Rangers also won 4 league games in February and went 4 points clear of Celtic, and secured the last 16 in the UEFA Cup. A late Nacho Novo away goal in Greece against Panathinaikos would see Rangers reach the last 16. I remember that night, a few Rangers fans I knew weren't wanting that because it would mean more games, but you look back and how important is that late Nacho Novo goal in Greece?
I know obviously away goals are still a thing then, so it was the 2 Panathinaikos games, if memory serves me right, and they weren't up to much. They weren't
very poor
games.
games.
The home game in particular was appalling. So it was almost like the players had the same mindset of, right, we've managed to get European football after Christmas, that'll do. And obviously at that stage there certainly wasn't the belief that it was going to be going any further, or that with any great ideas of progressing deep into the competition, because we played Panathinaikos and it looked as if that was the level that we were capable of beating, and then even then it was only just.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, the games would come thick and fast after that. 2 wins over Aberdeen and Hibs, and then that memorable 1-0 victory over Celtic. Kevin Thompson with a goal. Rangers were 6 points clear of Celtic with a game in hand as the month of March ended. But that game against Celtic, how big was that result? 1-0. I remember that's the only time I think I've ever heard my dad sing because of how massive that game was.
Yeah, I think most fans, even though that we were aware coming into April and May that we were going to have a lot of games to play, whether it was rearranged ones or because of the UEFA Cup, when you're going 6 points clear and you've got a decent fixture list, we know that around the corner we've got the double header against them. So going 6 points clear with the double header, you're like, right, well, this gives us a good cushion. It gives us a good head start on them. And obviously Thompson, he wasn't known for his goal scoring. For him to find himself in that position is deep in the box. It must be the first and only time he was ever that deep. But it was a wonderful goal, and it was a great 3 points, and it looked like it was just going to set us up for an incredible end of the season. Yeah,
it was very nicely poised, as you say, that wee cushion, and then a double header against Celtic. But before we get into that, Rangers went to Germany to take on Werder Bremen in the last 16. Very much the underdogs going into that tie, but a 2-0 victory at Ibrox in the first leg. Daniel Kuzan with the most comedic goal I've ever seen. I still don't know to this day what that goalkeeper was doing, but Davis makes it 2-0. Rangers take a big advantage to Germany going there, and that night it was 1-0 going on 7-0. And if it wasn't for Alan McGregor, Rangers, we wouldn't look back at that season as memorably as we do now, because McGregor was unbelievable that night. The save from Diego is the best save I've ever seen from a Rangers goalkeeper.
Yeah, the save he made, was it Slavia Prague away from home?
Yeah.
And this Werder Bremen save are the best 2 saves I've seen from any Rangers goal. And I was brought up. I was lucky enough to be able to remember Chris Woods and all of Andy Gorham, but these 2 saves were just ridiculous. They not just to sort of save them, but then to put them safe or to keep a hold of them are just ridiculous. And this is, for me, McGregor's legacy is sort of European games and what he's done in the Old Firm games, big games. He's so many times he's won us games, and that's the difference with good goalkeepers. And McGregor can, if he keeps playing, if he never plays again this season, then he can still look back and know that the contribution he's made has been as big as any Rangers goalkeeper in my lifetime, from my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. That night he was unbelievable. But we talk about that team, and let's get through some of the kind of signings that were there. Cuellar come in, he looked magnificent, and he's come out and said since playing with Davy Weir, it was like playing with my dad, and you saw how good Cuellar was. He was a top player. Whittaker, Papach, Ferguson, Hamdani, Thompson. I mean, Darsfield was there. Darsfield done really well. That team was just so well. They were just so well organised as well. That was the only way Rangers were going to get that far in Europe, was good team chemistry and just taking your chances.
Yeah, everybody knew their jobs as well in that team.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you start off and you go, right, it's McGregor, Hutton, Weir, Cuellar, Papach. That was the back four. And then we sold Hutton, and then that became Whittaker, Weir, Cuellar, Papach. Or particularly in Europe, you put Whittaker on the right-hand side of midfield, and it'd be Broadfoot at the back. And every player came in and knew their role. They knew exactly what their job was. They knew how to perform it, and there was nobody would come in and the levels would drop, or there'd be sort of a dip in the consistency, and it was just, they knew exactly what the task was. And again, when you look at, once we got past sort of Bravo, even in the whole of the knockout stages of the UEFA Cup, we only conceded a couple of goals from the round of 32 to the final. We only conceded a couple of goals, which is incredible.
Yeah, definitely as well. And it shapes up nicely. Rangers were drawn against Sporting Lisbon in the quarter-final, but before that, Rangers took on Dundee United at Hampden in the League Cup final in March the 16th. One of the most end-to-end cup finals I've ever seen watching Rangers in Scottish football. Dundee United took the lead early on. Chris Boyd came on from the bench, and I've never seen a Rangers striker. This is Chris Boyd's legacy for me. He was not letting Rangers lose that final. The 2 goals he scores, it's just Chris Boyd. He knows where to be. It's 2 each going into penalties, but that game had everything, didn't it?
Aye, it was just, I sometimes think with these games, and you see it occasionally in the league as well, it almost confuses me why sort of domestic managers, especially now with 5 subs, won't have more of a go, because you can, if you've got your front 4 or 5 players pressing at a really high intensity for 50-55 minutes, you can replace them all.
Yeah.
So let them run themselves into the ground and then replace, because we've played in midweek. They've had a week to prepare, and the best they can come up with is 11 men sitting behind the ball. And then like that Dundee United team, they knew that we've played a lot of games at this point, and they had a proper go. And that's,
they took the game
in those one-off games. I'd love to see the stats for teams that sit in and how often they actually manage to win, especially in a cup final. We look at Hearts in the Scottish Cup final this year, or this season in 2022, and they were a better team than how their manager set them up on the day. And the fact that it took us so long to actually break them down was probably the biggest scandal of the day, because they didn't lay a glove for the whole game. But that Dundee United performance was one where they generally went for a team that had been playing a lot of games, and there could be an element of fatigue about them. And it was only because of, like I said, Boyd being obsessed with sort of scoring goals and being the hero on the day that got us through.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, I've never seen a man as confident going up to take a penalty in my life than Boyd that day. He goes up and slots at home, and Rangers win the first trophy of the season. Boyd stepped up, and Rangers, it was a dramatic, huge victory for Smith's side, and that whole month of March was massive, but April was not as good domestically. A 3-3 draw away to Dundee United early in the month. The double header against Celtic. Now, we'll start with the first game, was the 1-1 game. Rangers played pretty well. Celtic take the lead early. I think it was it Maloney or Nakamura? I can't remember. I think it was Maloney scored that day. And Novo brings it back to 1-1, but McGregor saves a penalty and they lose a late goal. And it's just this one that one thing as well that we'll touch on later on. Celtic just had it late on in that game and they would go on to prove it again. But that first game, that 1-1, Queller gets sent off, McGregor getting injured, it was just again, it's heart in your mouth stuff, and that's what it was all season with those games. Yeah,
it's the fine margins, and certainly when it's two teams that are sort of competing as closely as that. So at this point, there's only sort of, obviously we've dropped points the week before, but it's going to go down to the wire. Queller getting sent off after 70 minutes. It's a big shout to say that's the league. But if we come out of that game with a draw, the mentality changes, because if you go down to 10 men and you manage to keep the result, it's a huge boost going into the next game, because we're playing them straight away in that next game. And again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but you don't know if their heads go down because they think, oh well, we should have beat them there. We've had 20 odd minutes where we could get another goal and get a win, but they've then got that flip side of that is they've scored in the 93rd minute to take the 3 points. So we've been that close to holding on, and then our heads go down rather than it being the other way around. And it's obviously how football works, is those inches make up the miles in the end. And it was so close to holding on and getting a deserved point from what was a tough game.
Yeah, that first game was unbelievable. But the second game was just as hectic as well. Celtic go up. I think Maloney scores this one and Nakamura scored the previous one. If somebody can correct me, then I would greatly appreciate it.
McDonald gets a double in this. Nakamura scored in the first one, and McDonald gets a double in this one.
Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to think when Maloney scored, but Maloney definitely scored a belter against Rangers at one point. But that game is another one as well. If Rangers take 1 point from those 6, I think Rangers win the league. I think it's just those 2 games, I think, decide the title for me, because it just changes the landscape of that season completely.
Yeah, I mean, both games, I think that the thing is, and frustratingly for Smith and the way that we've been playing in Europe, was that in both games we were in a position to take points. So the first game we should have got a draw. The second game we were 2-1 up, just shortly before half time. And then McDonald scores just before half time. So if you go into half time 2-1 up, obviously we're more likely to get something out of it. But then we've lost 2 goals and lose the game 3-2, and don't get anything out of it. So considering how good we were either keeping a clean sheet or maintaining just a 1 goal advantage in Europe, to then we seem to be really poor at it for certain spells domestically. In terms of some of the games that we dropped points in. I mean, we drew 3-3 with Dundee United before the 2 games against Celtic. So that's what 8 goals in 3 games we've lost. Which, considering how we'd been setting up in Europe, was just insane. It was a totally different team.
Yeah, and as you say, the players are just playing every. It felt like every day, but it was unbelievable the amount of games. But that April kind of turned the tide in the league more towards Celtic. But Rangers, to be fair to them, they had 3 games in hand. They still had the initiative, but it was all about Europe now. Sporting Lisbon, Rangers were through that memorable night in Portugal with Darsfield and Whittaker scoring the 2 goals to see them through a semi-final against Fiorentina. That Sporting Lisbon game, what's the memories of that night in Portugal?
Basically screaming at Whittaker to pass it for about 60 metres. Obviously we know what Whittaker's legacy is with Rangers, but for that, at that moment in time, it was one of the best Rangers goals I'd ever seen, and certainly the importance of it as well. It was just the composure at 1-0 up to just keep going with it, keep beating the player, and then to not play the pass, and the composure for the finish, because it was a lovely finish as well. He doesn't just take a swing at it. It's really calm, really composed, and at that point you know it's done, because it's the away goal thing. You know it's done. You can relax and enjoy the last few minutes, and it was just again another 2 clean sheets over the 2 games. You're thinking, how can we keep going and keep doing this?
But it's Fiorentina in the semi-final. Zenit and Bayern's in another semi-final, but the two games against Fiorentina, I remember that game at Ibrox, I think the fans were so nervous. It was just such a quiet affair. Do you remember that?
It wasn't just quiet. The actual game itself was really strange, in that it was neither team really seemed sure
what they wanted. Yeah,
of what to do. They didn't really seem to stick or twist. Rangers, we've already seen, we've played the away goals rule really well. I mean, we had Panathinaikos were at home first, Werder Bremen we were at home first, Sporting we were at home first, and then we've got another home tie with Fiorentina. And it's funny how nowadays we would want to bet Ibrox second, whereas that team seemed to suit having the away game second, because we knew that we keep a clean sheet at home, we can set ourselves up to counter, and it worked every time. Which is obviously totally different to nowadays, where we'd rather have the second game at Ibrox and go all guns blazing sort of thing.
Yeah,
but it was just a really strange game. And the second leg, all I ever remember from the second leg is Vieri just being an absolute shadow of the player that used to be, in the number of the chances that he missed for a player of his ability was incredible.
That sticks out to me as well. But as you say, Rangers had that game plan. They just knew that that defensive strategy. Walter Smith is a legend, but his ability in this game to just stick to that plan, because Fiorentina, as you say, Vieri had so many chances. Lucarelli as well, remember him, he had a few chances as well. Rangers just were under the cosh all night. Kuzan gets sent off as well, which I think plays a part in the next game. But it goes to penalties, and after Ferguson missing the first one, my head was in my hands. I was thinking, not now, not this way. That's what I felt like after that penalty.
Yeah, it was just, when you go behind early in a penalty shootout, you're just hoping for something. You just want anything to, that little bit of light. And it was the same in Seville. It was just, when Ramsey missed, you were just hoping that McGregor was going to produce something, but it wasn't to be. And this time round, obviously no McGregor. Alexander comes in, and it's almost a similar stage to what we're at just now with McGregor and McLaughlin, is that we had Alexander and McGregor, and you knew that they were slightly different styles, but you had two goalkeepers that you could trust to play in any game, and Alexander showed that, and he never let us down in any of the games after McGregor got injured, and he certainly earned his money this night.
Yeah, absolutely did. Yeah, I mean, Rangers scored their next 3 penalties, and Fiorentina missed 2, and Vieri's ball still in the air, I think. What, as you say, just a shadow of himself. But it all goes to Nacho Novo. Nacho Novo has a chance to send Rangers to the final, and just the commentary that night of Manchester, brace yourselves, and they're coming. It was just, Novo puts it away. He's the calmest man in Italy at that point, and it's just, that's it. Rangers are through to the final. What a feeling that was.
Yeah, you're saying about Boyd earlier. Novo was the same. You have 2 types of players: that the guys that want the headlines, they want to grab the ball, they want to take the winning penalty, and you have others that they're not quite sort of forced, but it's right. Look, there's an acceptance that they have to do it, rather than actually specifically wanting to do it and be that player. And you could see that with Novo. There was never any sort of, when you're looking at him, again, when you watch it back with hindsight, you looked so calm. You looked like he was going to score. And he'd taken big penalties for us in the past as well. And it was just, you knew that when you watch it back now, that we didn't really have anything to be worried about. But at the time, it was horrendous. And unbelievable. It's just, I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime.
No, I never thought
I'd see it. After 92, 93, and how close we came then, with a really good team competing against the best, I didn't think we'd be anywhere near a European final again, given how much the game had changed in 20 years, and the difference in finances from the clubs going around Europe, that I just didn't think we'd be back there again.
No, absolutely not. And this is one of my favourite. This is my favourite season being a Rangers fan. This is unbelievable, and this whole night, Smith deserves so much credit for taking that team to that final. But he's quite ironically, I think, and I think this kind of journey kind of reflects this as well. It's Zenit St Petersburg Rangers playing the final, managed by Dick Advocat. So there was a lot of kind of weird feelings around this game. But going into the final, I remember, obviously, although Zenit had battered Bayern Munich and they were a terrific team, there was confidence that Rangers could do it. But do you think there was a wee underestimation of just how good that Zenit team was?
I don't think there was an underestimation, because they had really turned Bayern Munich over.
Yeah,
it was an incredible performance, and I think the biggest worry at the time going into that game was how much our team had in their legs. It was almost, we knew they were going to be a good side, but it was, what did we have? What did we have in the tank? Were we capable of doing the same thing again? Because we'd seen the number of clean sheets that we'd kept. We knew that there was a way that we had to play for it to be successful, for us to win. And the strange thing is, during lockdown a couple of years ago, I went back and watched this game. There's a great website. I know there's a great website. They've got all these games on them. And usual thing, I'd not long had surgery on my knee, so I was off work anyway, just looking after the kids. I thought, I'm going to watch this game, and I thought we were 2-0. It's amazing how you remember things differently. I thought we were 2-0 down relatively early doors, and they'd coasted, and we hadn't really laid a glove on them. But it was actually quite an even game here. There's a lot of huffing and puffing. A lot of it played in the middle, but it wasn't like Alexander was keeping us in the game, or that they were missing. There are a couple of decent chances, but obviously we got to 70 minutes before they scored the opener, and it wasn't a sense of, oh, that's us knackered, because we actually started opening up a bit more after then, and that was the frustrating thing when I watched it back, was like, why didn't I have more of a go earlier?
I would have loved to have been able to ask Walter Smith, like, does he regret that? Because it's a one. Although they deserve unbelievable credit for getting to that final, but just in that final, could they have maybe opened the game up, and would it have been a different story?
I mean, we've seen interviews with players since then, and Barry Ferguson spoke about it, and Kevin Thompson as well, saying that they were done, but it just felt like they couldn't appreciate the magnitude of what they'd achieved getting to European final, because they knew that it was like one game, then the next game, then the next game. There was no build up to it. There was no time to prepare properly, so they just basically adopted the same sort of tactics, and it was a chance that, I know Novo had a chance to make it one each, and when I watched it back again, it was like, oh, it could have been another what might have been, but that was the biggest one for me. I know you touched on Kusan before, if you hadn't been sent off in the semi-final, but for me, Nova had scored in the previous two domestic games, I think, and he'd been playing well, and I think he should have been an option for this game from the start, because strikers, when they're confident, and Nova was always a patchy, sort of streaky player, and when he was on, and I think that would have been the one change I would have made in terms of sort of who was starting up front. I would have had Nova on from the start with this one, but as it was, the better team won. How it happened was totally different to how I remembered it, in terms of them scoring in the 94th minute, because I thought we were long out of the game. But it's funny how you remember things when you.
It's weird, yeah. I can never go back and watch two games, and it's for different reasons. I can't go back and watch this final, and I can't go back and watch this year's final, just for two different reasons. But right, let's get into it. Before we talk about the end of the season, Zenit had a week to prepare for that final. Rangers did not have anything like that. Rangers were trying to get the season extended. It was different to how I remember it was Celtic. Celtic got a full week to prepare. What goes on? Why Scottish football? That should have been celebrated as a Scottish team getting to a European final. And again, it's just a silly nature of Scottish football. I mean, Murray says some daft things in this time, but he comes out and says the football world are in disbelief at goings on like this, and he's right. And we know since, obviously, the SFA the presidents came out and said that he was told to not help Rangers in any way, but it felt as if Rangers were out on their feet, and any other league in the world would have helped a team to progress in the final.
I know, it's one of those things where there were some self-inflicted problems from not seeing enough likes of Partick Thistle in cup games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So with space, we had lost space, but playing 3 games. So we played on the 4th, 7th, 10th of May, and then we've got this game on the 14th. So we've got 3 games in such a short period before. So we've got 2 games in the same space that Zenit had none.
Zenit got 2 weeks off, I think. So
straight away we're up against, but I think more so from not from a tactical point of view, because I think this team knew what they were trying to do and how they were going to set up. It was more recovery. The players needed that rest and recovery because it wasn't a big squad in terms of the core of players that we used. And just having that extra few days recovery, just one of those games being postponed. So the game that we had on the 10th against Dundee United being postponed would have potentially given us that little 5-10% that we needed at that level, because there's one thing playing games and players get used to playing games, and I certainly think this current team is really good for when they're playing consistently. They seem to perform better, but not to the extent that you're playing every 2-3 days, which you are when you're playing sort of Saturday, Monday, Thursday, or Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. I think it was one week, which was just ridiculous. And because of how rare it happens, I mean, I don't want it this time around, but again, look, PSV have had their fixtures changed to give them more time to prepare for a Champions League qualifier. So it's because they appreciate that benefits Dutch football,
correct,
rather than just one individual team. So sometimes it would be nice to be asked, but do you want the game moved? I don't think we would on this occasion because of the players we've got missing and all that sort of stuff. But certainly in 2008, it shouldn't even have been a question.
Yeah, nice to see that Scottish football hasn't changed in that regard.
And we all know the reasons why it wasn't granted, and the fairy tale trips abroad that couldn't be moved and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean it makes you angry, but again, would it have changed the result? I don't know. I don't think it would have. But again, you would just playing 3 games in 10 days as going into a European final, which, as you say, benefits the whole of Scottish football. And again, just only in Scottish football does that happen. But what was your memories of that day? A wee story about that day. Where were you? Where did you watch the game?
Well, this is the year I got married. I actually got married so a couple of months after this. So I was skint. I was absolutely brassy. We'd paid for the honeymoon, the wedding, and everything. So my wife's a Rangers fan as well. So there was plenty of guys from the town. So I live in the Borders, and there was loads of guys went down to Manchester. It was an easy enough trip, but there was an element of a superstition as well, because we'd watched every game together. It was like, right, and how much it was going to cost us. It's like, well, like, we'll just watch it at home. So we watched it at home, but it was just the whole day, same as with Seville. I mean, we went up to Glasgow for Seville, and it was just that almost feeling of being feeling sick for the whole day, waiting for it to start, and it was just, I see, you never think it's going to happen, because we'd actually just bought a house as well, and I'll still remember the carpet, the fireplace, everything, because it needed loads doing to it, and that's my lasting memory of that game, is the state the house was in. And after it, when you speak to your mates and like some of the stories, like, oh, I wish I'd gone down, but again, you're applying hindsight to it, because it just simply didn't have the money to do it. I would have loved to have done it, but it just simply wasn't there, and it was but it was still, one of the things you'll never forget.
And it was, I mean, we went down, I went down with my dad, uncle, 2 cousins, and we went down a Saphira, parked in a wee car park next to the Etihad, and watched the game in a car park in the next to the Etihad in a velodrome. I mean, it's unbelievable day, and a day you never forget. But again, just so many memories. If you have memories from that day, leave them in the comments, because I love hearing memories of that day. But So Manchester was over and Rangers had to play a whopping 4 games in 8 days to try and win a domestic treble. The players had zero energy. I think they were out on their feet and they had to pull themselves together. A draw away to Motherwell, a 3-0 win against St Mirren meant it was all going down to the last day. Celtic had the initiative. Celtic won, they won the league, but Rangers just couldn't get it. Rangers just couldn't get it done, and Celtic won the league that day. Celtic won 1-0 at Tannadice against the United. Rangers were beaten 2-0 at Pittodrie against Aberdeen. That was a game just out of frustration, but the credit that Rangers team deserve for that season, that whole, and they go and obviously wrap the Scottish Cup up 3-2 in the final game. They'd played 68 games that season and come away with 2 trophies and nearly won 4. I mean, that season, that whole season, just sum it up for us, how monumental was that and how much credit does that team and Walter Smith deserve?
Yeah, I think the Motherwell result, I mean, again, as I said before, it was the end of that season, and I think that's where the sort of the mental fatigue comes into it, because the 2 Celtic games were in positions to get points, the Dundee United game as well, and then the Motherwell game towards the end of the season. We've only got a few games left. We're winning 1-0 in that game at half time, and it's whether it was the sort of mental strength used to go on and kill teams off, or it was just trying to hold on to what we had, and we just weren't capable of it. Because I still think if we hold on against Motherwell, I think we'll get something against Aberdeen. But obviously, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But that season as a whole was just incredible. I certainly didn't think we'd see anything close to that. And yet, last season we weren't far away in terms of the number of games that we played. And it was just, for different reasons, like the UEFA Cup run was exciting. Some of the games were horrendous to watch, and there's no way you wouldn't want to go back and watch the Panathinaikos game, or even the sort of first legs against Fiorentina or Sporting. Those aren't ones that I have to on the treadmill and go into YouTube and watch those to pass the time. But as a whole, it kind of summed up Walter Smith and his second term in terms of win the 2 cups, and we were always a good cup team under Smith as well. So winning the league, and he just knew how to get the best out of a group of players. And I think if we'd had a slightly bigger squad, it could have been even more that season. A couple of decisions one way or another, but it was still to be so close to winning the league with what we had to put up with at the end of that season, and the sort of mental stress of playing in a major European final was some effort.
Yeah, it absolutely was. That season is monumental for whole reasons, and it's the sort of reason we look back and do these kind of shows, is just to reminisce on how good that season was. Gavin, it's been an absolute pleasure to do this show with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been fun looking back on what might have been, but also a lot of highs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a tremendous journey. On the next part of the Rangers journey, what happens in 2008 when Walter Smith clinches 3 in a row? He wins the next 3 championships with minimal budgets. There's hardly any money there to spend, and the calm before the storm. What happens? David Murray's in the last tenure of his Rangers spell, and he sells the club, but little does he know the impact that will have. Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in to this episode of the Rangers Journey, and we will see you for the next part.